Welcome to the Filmmakers Focus podcast. I'm Doc Kennedy, and this week's focus is on screenwriting. And our special guest is Ashley Scott Meyers of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast and sellingyourscreenplay.com. Before we dive into that, I wanted to give you a little update on what we got going on here at Filmmakers Focus. So I was going to do the podcast seasonally and have season 1, season 2, and I decided to go ahead and push that and push myself and make it a weekly show, or at the very least bi-weekly. We get busy doing side projects or doing projects that we need to focus on. So I can't promise that it's going to be every week, but it's going to be pretty close. I'm excited about what we're going to do with this, the possibilities, the people that you're going to get to learn from, and myself as well. So I'm excited to learn from these people that we'll be having on the show. The way that we get guests to come on is through word of mouth and just reaching out and making a simple request. We all have projects that we need to plug, that we want to get word out about. So it hasn't been too hard in finding guests. If you know of someone that you would love to have on the show, that you would love to hear from, and you want to make a connection, please feel free to do so. But that's a great way to help us get the right people on, to get the right content, because we want to hear the best stuff that we can and be able to learn from the best. Another thing that would help is if you have the time to leave a podcast review on iTunes. The way that podcasts work is iTunes is a search engine. So the more reviews, positive reviews there are, and if you don't like the show, you can leave that. I'm fine with that. I can live with it. I would rather hear true feedback than just a pat on the back. But the way that the search engine works is it goes through how many reviews there have, and they'll push you to the top of the list. So we want to make sure that Filmmakers Focus is getting out there and people are enjoying the content, and people that need to hear it can hear it. Another way to make that happen is by sharing it through social media. A simple retweet does a lot. You never know who that might reach. So if you're willing to do that, I really appreciate that. And if you send me a tweet at DocKennedy37 or at Filmmakers Focus, I'll make sure that you get a retweet as well. A special shout out. So real quick, just to catch you up on myself and what I got going on. Unfortunately, I got robbed a little bit ago, and that kind of set things back a little bit, but nothing that can't be overcome. And so I did pick up a part-time job, and I'm working the evenings. I'm doing some delivery driving, which is working out fine. I chose to take an evening job because I found that I was kind of not using that time of the day to the best of my ability. So why not just put that into something where I'm not going to be trying to work on editing projects or anything like that. That was my reason for taking a night job. The downside to that is if I am shooting something or I need to shoot something in an evening right now, that kind of puts a little bit of a hitch on that. But it's okay. I'm thankful for the job, and I think it's going pretty good so far. So I know it won't be a long-term deal. And that's another reason I took this job, was I know that I can just leave and it won't be too damaging to the company that I'm working with. And it's kind of a win-win for both of us. I do continue to freelance and pick up gigs where I can, just doing small projects here and there, just paying off some bills, and also started editing other podcasts. And this is something I'm excited about. So I'm helping produce and editing other shows that will get positive, solid content out for other people to enjoy on a variety of subjects. And it's just fun for me to be able to help other people who might not have the editing skills or have the time to be able to get their content out and help them make it sound better. So I'm super excited about what can be with that. I'm going to continue to push that end as far as editing and producing podcasts. So with that, we'll jump into our conversation with Ashley Scott Meyers on screenwriting.
And now our feature presentation.
Hey, Ashley, welcome to the show.
Hey, Doc, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate your taking the time to talk to me.
Oh, this is an honor for me. I love your podcast. I love the Selling Your Screenplay podcast, and I do listen to it pretty regularly. There's
Well, thank you.
Yeah, well, there's few that I do listen to regularly, and I'm being sincere when I do say that.
Yeah.
I
No,
just
that's
get a lot
appreciated.
out of
Thank you
it.
very much.
So, tell us a little bit about what you got going on right now, because this is what I'm really excited about. You've
Yeah,
got
yeah,
this.
sure. So as you mentioned, I do run sellingyourscreenplay.com, and a big part of sellingyourscreenplay.com is a weekly podcast. And I'm over 100 episodes. I think I'm pushing up on like 110 episodes. And I've been doing that for, I guess, about 2.5 years. Just the podcast. I started out as just a blog, and before that, I am a screenwriter. So I've sold some scripts, and so that's kind of why I started the blog. Was really just to kind of share my experiences as a screenwriter. And this was, I think it was 2009. I started the blog, and then slowly it built up a little bit, and then I had the time, and I listened to a lot of podcasts as well. So I just really love podcasting as a format. So I was like, well, I should really take a stab at podcasting, and it's a great medium. So I started that about 2.5 years ago. The podcast, as I said, I'm a little over 100 episodes. And the other project I'm working on, as I said, I am a screenwriter and filmmaker as well. So that's the other part. I try and teach people how to write and sell their screenplays. But then also I am a working screenwriter as well. So I have a project currently on Kickstarter that I'm trying to get going. And it's a script that I wrote, and now I'm going to also direct it and produce it. I have got some other partners that will help in the producing, but basically I'm going to write and direct it, and then I will be working with a bunch of producers and some great actors, and we're going to go out and shoot the movie.
That's awesome. How'd this whole script come together?
Well, it's do you want the long answer or the short answer?
Whichever one you want to dive into.
Yeah, and I talk about this a lot on the podcast. One of the things my sort of career as a screenwriter has been is in writing sort of lower budget independent genre films. And when people say independent films, most people think of like Sundance, and those are like sort of art house films, and those are kind of a sort of a separate entity to what I'm really talking about and what I've really written. And there is sometimes some crossover, but for the most part, they're two totally separate beasts, and they're marketed and they're produced in entirely different fashion. And so really just sort of coincidentally, when I started out, I was just like most people, I was just writing stories that sounded interesting to me. And the first script I sold was a sort of just a coming of age story about a bunch of young guys in their 20s who, hang out. They were washing dishes at restaurants, and they were going to strip clubs, as young 20-something guys do. And so we wrote this script, and we sort of looked at it. We were trying to write sort of, a Jack Kerouac on the road for our generation. But what ended up happening is we ended up sort of hooking up with these producers who were producing sort of T&A type films. You've seen those video box covers where it's basically, a buxom, young, attractive lady on the cover. And, there's a sort of a loose story in the movie. And so this is sort of my introduction to filmmaking and these sort of genre films. And so just over the years, I've had that sort of was my foray into filmmaking, and I've just met more people. And so I've gotten more into just writing these types of scripts, low budget genre films, horror, comedy, thrillers. And so I've been thinking, and again, I talk about this a lot on the podcast. I've sort of been thinking about, when you're writing these types of scripts, budget is a huge consideration. So you are writing scripts that can be shot on very small budgets, as few locations as possible, as few actors as possible, no stadium scenes, no big crowd scenes, no big special effects, no big car chases, big car explosions. So you really try and write scripts that are as good as possible, but with really keeping the budget in mind, because most of these movies are made for, definitely well under 5 million. And usually in this day and age, Dish Dogs was the movie I was just talking about, and that had about a budget of about 2 million, but that was, over 10 years ago now. And so budgets have continued to, collapse, and budgets are much tighter now. So most of these movies are getting made for well under $1 million now. So you really have to try and come up with a cool story, and it fits into a clear genre, because these producers can sell these movies based on sort of the box cover and the genre that they fit into. There are certain niches that they understand, and they know how to market these films, whether it be, broad comedy, or whether it be a thriller or a low budget action movie. So that's kind of how I've been writing the last few years. I've been writing scripts very specifically with these types of markets in mind. So I finally got an idea that I thought, if I can't, I'll send the script out, but if I can't sell it, I'll write it so it's really low budget. And if I can't sell it easily, I'll just go and I'll produce it myself and I'll direct it as well. I mean, most of these people these producers I've been working with over the years, they would never let me direct one of these movies because I've never directed anything. And they're smart not to let me direct it because, who knows if I know what I'm doing. So I kind of thought, I really like this story. It could be shot on a very, very small budget. 60 or 70% of the movie takes place in one location with 2 actors. And so it's very, very contained, can be shot on a very, very small budget. And so I did send it out to some of my contacts. And when I got the script read, didn't get a quick sale. So I was like, you know what, I'm just going to produce this movie myself. And I will direct it as well. And so it'll give me a nice resume piece as a director. Obviously, I have some credits as a screenwriter. But hopefully this can kind of just, move my career ahead one notch. And really the best experiences I've had as a filmmaker are being involved in the production. As I said, I've helped produce some of the movies I've written. I've edited some of the movies I've written after they've been produced and stuff. And those have really been the best experience. In almost every case, when I've just sold a script and then producers and directors have taken it and produced it without any input from me, they've radically changed the script. And, I would argue for worse. I'm sure they would argue for the better. So who knows? But the bottom line is it's been a very, when I just sell scripts and they get produced, it's a very, I would say, less than fulfilling it becomes sort of heartbreaking to see someone go and shoot what you thought was kind of a cool movie and kind of turn it into, in the case of Dish Dogs, that first movie I saw, we thought we had written a kind of a cool Jack Kerouac on the road type of a movie, and they turned it into, a sex romp, a sort of a teenage sex romp movie. So I'm just hoping that with this one, I can stay focused on my vision and get it produced. And as I said, I've written it so that it can be done on a very minimal budget.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit more.
Sure.
Writing with the budget in mind. I know that I see people that I'm around and work with, and we got these ideas, and sometimes the producer in me just says, hey, that's not even doable. There's no way we can afford that. Mm-hmm. Do you write with budget in mind, just going, okay, I can't go over here, but we can stay within this?
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 sides to that. I mean, I can tell you from experience, one of the services I offer through Selling Your Screenplay is leads from producers. And I can tell you from someone who interfaces with a lot of producers who are looking for material, scripts, like if you can come up, I mean, Buried is an example. I think that came out in 2010, and it was literally one guy in a coffin buried under the ground. That's literally the whole movie.
Wow.
So if you can come up with a cool way to have a movie in that's very, very contained, 1, 2, 3, 4 actors, 1 location, and it's actually a good script, a really compelling script, a compelling story, you've got something that I can almost guarantee it's always hard, but as much as you can give a guarantee in this business, you will find someone who will want to produce that movie. It doesn't have to be a great script, even just an okay script that has a budget in mind that really is contained. You can probably find someone who would like to produce that movie. You're not going to make a lot of money on it because the budget, they may produce it for $10,000, so there's no real money to pay the writer, but you will get a produced credit if you can do a decent movie that contains. So to answer your question is yes, I very much do. I'm very conscious of budget in mind because I know the people that I have connections with are these producers who are producing stuff, well under $1 million. And so they're not, they would like to produce a $50 million movie, but they don't have the resources. As producers, they don't have the resources to raise that much money. So I try and keep these scripts just as simple. I try and make them compelling and dramatic and thrilling and all, with lots of suspense, all that stuff. But I definitely do keep budget in mind. And I think you should if you're writing for this sort of low budget genre market, which I think is an excellent market for screenwriters to write in, because as I said, these producers that are working in this market, they don't have necessarily contacts at CAA, and they don't have the budget to pay the top writers in the industry. So they've got to be more open to new writers, to writers that don't have credits. Maybe writer that just has done a couple of shorts that are cool. Oh yeah, let me check out your feature script. So these producers working in this arena are much more open to working with new writers. So it's a great place for a writer to kind of cut his teeth and get a couple of produced credits. It's much easier. It's much less competitive than trying to write those studio films. So that's a kind of a long answer, but the bottom line is, yes, I really am very conscious about what sort of budget I'm writing for, because for me to sell it, I know I've got to keep it low budget.
Yeah, so that's got to be your bread and butter, is making the sale. So that's first on your mind.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. So with this project that you're working on, that you have the Kickstarter for, you know that you're directing, you're going to have creative say, you're producing, you know, the story's going to go the way that you want. So has that helped in writing that script to know that it's not going to be as far base as you were talking about with your first film?
Yeah, no, it definitely has. I mean, so it definitely has. I mean, and there's definitely some things that I have a very distinct idea about how they're going to go. And as I was writing them, I kind of knew, well, you know, I can, you know, these are sets that I have access to. These are actors, you know, certain roles. These are actors that I know. So there definitely was, with this one specifically, I would say normally when I'm writing a script, I don't necessarily have specific locations or specific actors in mind. But with this one, you know, I know some actors and I know sort of some locations that I might have access to. So yeah, I would say it does. It took it down, you know, drilled it down even a little bit more, since I did know that I was going to be writing and directing it as well.
That's good. So
Yeah.
on the subject of time, I know a lot of people listening, they have full-time jobs, part-time jobs, they're going to school, they're trying to work on their screenplay. The time issue always is a factor. You have a family, you're obviously you're staying busy. How do you make sure that you have time to write?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And believe me when I tell you, I mean, I've been in those positions when I was starting out. I was working, you know, low paying jobs. I was working hundreds of hours, you know, at low paying jobs. And you just got to stay focused on sort of the long term, just the long-term vision of writing and selling scripts. So I don't know that I have any great tips. I mean, even now, my life, I mean, I'm running sellingyourscreenplay.com, so that takes an enormous amount of my time. I also have other web properties that I run. It's not just Selling Your Screenplay. So I have a bunch of websites I'm running, and then I also am writing scripts. And as an example, I just finished a writing assignment for a bunch of producers. They're doing a low-budget spoof, so that was taking an enormous amount of my time. What I try and do, and I would say this advice is not from me. It's just advice that I've heard from many successful people, far more successful than myself, is, you know, routine, getting in a routine and sticking with that routine is, I really believe, is one of the keys to a high productivity. And you listen to guys that are super successful, and how, you know, it may not be sexy or creative, or, you know, it may sort of stifle some people, but being highly productive, I really believe, is getting into a routine. And that's what I suggest. And that's really what I do with my own life. I try and get up. My kids usually wake up around 7. I usually wake up a little bit before. So I might, like, just, let's say I wake up at 6:30. I'll just zoom through my emails, just to see if there's anything interesting in there. And just, I don't really spend a lot of time, but, you know, 15-20 minutes I might spend just looking at my emails. Rarely would I really respond to too many emails. But then my kids get up around 7. We have breakfast from 7:30, and then they go off to school. And then pretty much from, like, I try and write from like 7:30 to 9, or maybe if I'm on a good session, I would go till 9:30. So I try and put in 2 solid hours, an hour and a half to 2 solid hours, you know, 4 or at least 4 days a week, and preferably 5 days a week. You do that, and I think, and then I basically go and do my other work, which is Selling Your Screenplay and a variety of these other websites. And that really does consume the day. And I might, if I get a little bit of time at the night, I might go back to it. I also go for a run every day around lunchtime. Before I eat my lunch, I will go for a run. And I try and pick something, like I try and end my writing time in the morning to have an idea, just something that maybe I'm stuck with or something that I'm working on. And then as I find, if I'm walking or running, the routine of walking and running actually helps me be creative. So I find, you know, not every time, but, you know, some of the time, if I am mulling a scene over, or mulling some decisions I'm going to make within this screenplay during my run, I can just grind down on that problem, and I will actually come to some solutions during that run. And sometimes I'll come back and I'll just scribble down some notes of what I thought of on that run. But most of the time I don't. Most of the time the next morning, I've thought through the scene that I'm going to write tomorrow morning. I've thought it through on my run today. And it makes the writing a little bit easier, a little more productive. And then I will also start, typically, let's just say if in that hour and a half to 2 hour window where I'm writing, let's just say I write 3 pages, and that's probably about right. If I'm actually writing on a script that I've outlined, have a detailed outline on, I can generally do, let's say, 3 pages in that time frame. So I usually will start by rewriting the 3 pages from the night before, just, loosely going over it, reading it over, and doing some little tweaks to it. And then I will begin in on my new 3 pages. And that kind of, for me, just ramps the process up of just looking at what I did yesterday, sort of tweaking that, rewriting that is generally a very easy thing to do, but that also gets me in the frame of mind of starting to actually write the new pages. And then, as I said, then maybe I'll produce 3 new pages. So I've edited 3 pages from yesterday, and I've written 3 totally new pages for today. But I would say the biggest thing is just sticking to a routine. Maybe if you're working a full-time job, that's an hour at night. It's an hour. Maybe you get up an hour early before you have to leave to work. But even with an hour a day, you should probably be able to write 2 scripts per year. That's 1 script every 6 months, and that will add up. It doesn't seem like a lot, and even if you only do 1 page a day, I think you can still. What's the math on that? Maybe there's 150 days in 6 months. Even if you miss a few days, even if you only do 1 page a day and let's say you spend half that time outlining, so that's like 75 pages in 6 months. I mean, you're still 1.5, 2 pages a day, you're still able to produce even, and I don't think that's unrealistic. Like an hour a day to produce 1 to 2 pages of quality script is unrealistic. And then, after 2 years, you've got 4 scripts. And after 5 years, you've got 10 scripts. It's going to take some time, but, hopefully if you've written 10 scripts, hopefully some of them are actually halfway decent and you can start to, move forward. But just don't get discouraged. I would say come up with a routine that you can stick to, whether that be staying up an hour later at night, or whether that be writing during your lunch hour, or whether that be writing in the morning. Stick to it and be consistent and just get into that routine, and it will add up. It's just like drops in a bucket. It takes a long time for that bucket to fill up, but every day, if you put a couple drops in that bucket, eventually it will fill up.
How many scripts had you written up to the first one that you sold?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think Dish Dogs, I think it was like maybe number 8, the 8th script I had written. And I think the 7th script I wrote, which was obviously right before Dish Dogs, was a film noir script. And I ended up selling that one as well, but I sold it many, many, many years after I sold Dish Dogs. So that was actually the first script. And pretty much I know like scripts number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And I might be off by 1. The script that I'm talking about is Rush Lights. That one I wrote, and then I wrote Dish Dogs. I can't remember if Rush Lights is number 6 or 7. If I was guessing, I think it's number 7. But the bottom line is scripts number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 are god awful, terrible, and I will never sell those. So that 6th and 7th script were the ones that I did end up selling. And then scripts number 8, 9, and 10 I never sold. Scripts number 14, 15, 16 I never sold. So there's a lot of patches in there. I think on IMDb at this point, I think I've got about 6 feature film credits, and I've sold a script or 2 that I sold that did not get made. So there's a couple sales out there, but I've probably at this point written maybe 40 scripts and maybe sold 8 or something. So there's a lot of scripts that are not sold, and I'm still sending them out, and I'll probably never sell them.
Yeah, but there's something to that too, where you had something that was before you hit the big one, and you were still able to sell something before that time. It wasn't giving up on that. It was going forward with what was working. Mm-hmm. But you still, that's encouraging to me that you would be able to sell something that came from your early days. Earlier,
yeah.
And
I could definitely tell I I got to the point where I wrote that seventh script. As I said, my version of the script was called Inheritance, and when the script got made, the director changed it to Rushlights. Not exactly sure why, but that's a whole another story. But my script Inheritance, I could definitely tell. I was sending it out and stuff, and I could tell, the feedback. I was starting to get some people that were actually saying, "Hey, this is actually pretty good. This is kind of a cool script." So I could tell. I felt like at that point I did turn a corner, and at this point I was pretty young. I was probably 25 or 26 or something. So I think I had been in LA maybe 2 or 3 years writing scripts. As the time went on, I was definitely writing scripts, and those are the years where I worked, crappy full-time jobs and part-time jobs, and was writing on weekends and nights and stuff. But I definitely felt like I turned a corner and started to get some positive responses from that script. So, but believe me, I've written a bunch of scripts after that that didn't get any positive response. So I think in some ways, we were with Dish Dogs, I wrote it with a co-writer. With Inheritance, I just wrote that one myself. But I think I may have been a little bit lucky, and both of those scripts were sort of low-budget genre films. And at the time, I didn't necessarily realize that that's what I had written, and so I think I was a little bit lucky in getting good feedback and getting some interest in those scripts. Because as I said, after that, I started to write other types of scripts and didn't necessarily get anywhere with some of those. So I was still very much just taking sort of shots in the dark.
So when it comes to having a co-writer, is that something that you would openly recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't had any sort of bad experiences with co-writers. It's definitely, you're going into business with this person. So you need to think it through. You need to know the person that you're going to be going into business with. How are they going to react when different situations come up? Nathan Ives is my co-writer on Dish Dogs, and I've written a bunch of scripts with him, and we just have a good relationship. And we know that, neither one of us is that concerned about money. So we know we're never going to be fighting over money or credit. It's like we just split everything 50-50. It doesn't matter who writes a little more or who writes a little less. We're just casual. Our personalities are casual enough. We're not going to get tied up on that kind of stuff. And that's an important thing. You do want to definitely think these things through. It's going to take years. I mean, most likely you're going to be in business with this person if you write a script for years. It's not a bad idea to really outline exactly what the expectations are. I mean, who's going to market the script once it's done? What are people going to do with it? Just so there's not any misunderstandings. And it's not, I don't know that it necessarily, maybe a lawyer would tell you differently. I'm not a lawyer, and I don't pretend to be, so I'm not in any way giving legal advice. But, just be clear up front what are you going to do with the script, and what are your expectations? I mean, in the case of Dish Dogs, as I said, it was made for about $2 million. So we weren't going to make millions of dollars off that script, but and it wasn't anything me and Nathan had talked about, but we just knew that we were cool with that. We just wanted to see the movie get made. And so that was important. And, but there might be writers out there, well, no, I'm not going to sell a script for less than $200,000. You want to know those things going into it so that there's no surprises. And you just got to understand where the other person's coming from and then make a decision. But I would make sure, think these things through, talk them out with your potential partner. How is the writing credit going to be shared? How are you going to split the proceeds? What sort of expectations do the both of you guys have in terms of how much money you're going to make? And, who are you going to take the script to? How are you going to market it? Who's going to do that work? Who's going to spend that money? If you're going to enter contests, I mean, there's all these services, including selling your screenplay, that costs money, whether it be my service or any number of the other services. Who's going to pay for that stuff? Just think these things through and understand that it's probably at best going to take, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. The script I just mentioned, Rushlights, I wrote that script. I think I wrote it in 1995, and he optioned it in 1999. He had the option for 10 years. He just kept renewing the option, and then in 2009 he bought the script. But then it took, and I think he shot it in 2009, but then it took him another 3 years to actually get the money to do post-production. So if you go to IMDb, it's listed as Rushlights in 2012. That was when he finally finished the movie in 2012. But again, I wrote that thing in 1995, so it was pushing up on 20 years. So understand that when you're writing a script with someone, it's a long-term project that may take, the better part of 2 decades, if ever. I mean, if it may take longer than that. You just don't know. So just be prepared for that.
Yeah. I like that, though. There's something special about the wait and that it still came around. I really like that.
No, believe me, I was very happy that it eventually did sell.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah. So I know at sellingyourscreenplay.com, you have a lot of scripts available for people to read that are from movies that we all know and love. Can you just share with us a little bit about the value of reading other screenplays?
Yeah, I mean, there's things like there's certain things that different, screenwriting gurus and working screenwriters, there's certain things that they'll tell you to do. Well, you got to do this and you got to do that. And, there's a lot of differing opinions. I would say the two things that every single, person agrees that you must do to be a good screenwriter is write a lot. Obviously, you have to write a lot. And then the other thing is, read other screenplays. So I think if you're going to be if you want to be a serious screenwriter and you want to be a professional screenwriter, I don't think that there's any working writer, reputable writer anywhere that would not say that is incredibly valuable. You need to open up some screenplays of produced movies and start reading them, and read a bunch of them, hundreds, if not thousands of them, to get a feel for how screenplays are laid out, how writers convey meaning on the page, how scenes work, the pacing of scenes, the structure of scenes, how it looks on the page, how it feels on the page when you read it. And you can't get that in sort of a black box. And you can't just go in and start writing without reading scripts and understanding how that works. I suppose maybe it's possible, but it would be very, very unlikely that anybody would really ever be able to do that. Obviously, watching movies is definitely important, but it's not important as actually reading some scripts. I mean, if you're going to be an architect, you don't just go and look at a bunch of houses and then say, oh, I know how to build a house. You have to dig into the actual mechanics of how a house is built and look at the plans and the blueprints of how a house came together. And that's what the script is. It's really a blueprint. You've got to read them and you've got to really understand them. And it takes years to really kind of appreciate how good certain scripts are and appreciate why those scripts are good. I saw a forum post on a site where people were asking, gee, I don't really understand why Shawshank Redemption is considered such a good movie. And it's like, if you don't understand why it's such a great movie and also a great script. I've read the movie and I've read the script and seen the movie, many times. You haven't put in the work yet. You have not spent the time understanding how movies work and what movies are about. And you need to just go and do that. It's unlikely if you don't understand what makes a good movie and why these movies are good. I find it hard to believe you would ever be able to actually write a good movie. I don't know. Maybe some people are so intuitive that they would be able to do it, but I find it hard to believe. Just touching on what you said, the Selling Your Screenplay library, it's completely free. You just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/library. There's over 1,000 scripts at this point. We're adding to it every day. We're trying to upload new scripts to it. And all of them are in PDF format. So you can just click on it. You could go there on your mobile device, your iPad, your iPhone, and sellingyourscreenplay.com/library. Just scroll through. There's an index page of all the scripts. You just click on it. And PDFs, they open nicely on virtually every device, whether it be an iPhone, an iPad, or even a desktop computer. And it's free. So, these scripts are out there nowadays online. So they're on my site and other sites. So just go and find some scripts, some movies that you like, and click on them and restart reading scripts. It takes a little bit of work and a little bit of effort, but I think it will be time well spent.
That's awesome. And we'll link to all this stuff in the show notes at dockennedy.com. So. I reached out to the Filmmakers Focus community, and we had one question come in from Harrison Webster, which I thought was a pretty good question. Sure. Are there any books on screenwriting you would recommend?
Yeah, I have 3 books that I do recommend, and this is getting into. Remember, I said there was 2 things that everybody pretty much agrees you have to do, and then when you start getting into what books do you recommend, there's a lot of debate among working screenwriters, screenwriting gurus, and there becomes a lot of debate in this arena. But the books that I have found helpful are Sid Field's Screenplay. I read that one very early on in my journey as a screenwriter, and it just it opens your eyes to certain things that probably intuitively you sort of know it, and specifically what I'm talking about is screenplay structure and sort of the beginning, middle, and end, the act breaks, and how screenplays are set up in this sort of paradigm. And again, intuitively, I think most of us probably understand it, but just seeing it written out is I found it to be enormously helpful. And I mean, it's in this day and age, it's like I think you can go to Amazon for $10. I mean, it's like a beer in an LA bar costs you $10. So it's like, we're not talking about much money or even much time. I'm a slow reader. You can read it fairly quickly. It's an easy read. So I definitely recommend that. Sid Field's Screenplay. Another book that someone recommended to me early on in my career was Laius Egri's The Art of Dramatic Writing. And it was written, I think, in like the 1940s or 50s. So it was really geared towards playwriting. But it's an excellent companion book to Sid Field's Screenplay. Sid Field's Screenplay is really all about structure, screenplay structure, and that's great. It's great to read that. Laius Egri is really all about character and character development and the character-driven story. So it's a great complement to Sid Field's Screenplay. Again, it feels a little bit dated because it's written about playwriting, not necessarily screenwriting. But a lot of the lessons can be applied. I would say it's definitely a much denser text than Sid Field's Screenplay. But I often will go back to that. That's a book that I've gone back to. I don't know that I've ever read Sid Field's Screenplay again. Maybe I've leafed through it over the years. I don't really remember the last time I read it. But Laius Egri is a book that actually is on my bookcase, and I will leaf through it even now after reading it. Now it's probably 20 years ago I read it for the first time, and now I still will occasionally go back to it. And then the third book that I recommend is a newer book, Blake Snyder's Save the Cat. And he actually has 3 books out, and I would highly recommend all 3 of them, but especially the first one and the second one. He sort of takes what Sid Field did with the structure, and he really breaks it down even further into really very manageable chunks of a screenplay, almost down to like 5 or 10 page chunks. So he has an even more sort of boiled down template that you can use. And again, I found this helpful. But that book came out in 2005. I don't think I read it till maybe 2009, 2010. But interestingly, again, a lot of this stuff is intuitive as a storyteller. He talks about, I think the catalyst is on page 12, and typically on page 12. And, I had never read Blake Snyder until, as I said, 2009. And I went and looked at some of my scripts that I wrote before that. And, they're still structured pretty well. They have a catalyst. They have this. So, again, intuitively, as storytellers, we watch movies, we read scripts, we understand sort of the structure, at least a lot of us. But Blake Snyder was real good at breaking it down and talking about sort of why these different sections take place. The other thing about Blake Snyder that I really like, and when people criticize the Blake Snyder books, that's typically what they're criticizing. They're typically criticizing the what I just talked about, which is this Blake Snyder beat sheet, which is really sort of a template for screenplay structure. And a lot of people find it overly formulaic, and that's sort of the pushback on the Blake Snyder book. As I said, I liked it and I got a lot out of it. I would recommend it. It's an even easier read than Sid Field's Screenplay. If you're a fast reader, I bet you can read the whole book in like 6 or 8 hours. Again, it's probably only $10 on Amazon. But the other thing I like about Blake Snyder is he also has a very pragmatic approach to coming up with an idea and then vetting those ideas. And if you follow his sort of, and he was a working screenwriter that sold a lot of spec scripts back in the late 80s, early 90s. And he had a good sort of a way of going about coming up with an idea, writing a logline for an idea. And so if you read that, how a professional writer sells spec scripts, I think it's a valuable resource. A lot of people, they come up with an idea and they start writing their screenplay. And he keeps pushing back on that. No, don't start writing your screenplay. First, write a logline. And that's so important to write your logline before anything else. You write your logline and your title, and then you move into an outline, and then you move into a more detailed outline, and then you begin writing your script. And so I think that is a a method that could help a lot of people. It could help you really vet some of your ideas and not waste a lot of time. A lot of screenplays from newer writers that I see through Selling Your Screenplay, I read the log lines, and some of them sound, perfectly, I guess, okay ideas, but I just know that they're never going to sell them because they haven't gone through this vetting process that Blake Snyder talks about, which is talking to your friends, coming up with a log line that actually has a chance in the marketplace. Mm-hmm. So I think those are the books that I would recommend. Blake Snyder's Save the Cat. His second book's, I can't remember, Blake Snyder Goes to the Movies, or Save the Cat Goes to the Movies, I think is what that one's called, the second book. And there he basically takes some famous movies and breaks them down into his Blake Snyder beat sheet. And again, I think it's enormously helpful, at least for me. I feel like I learn by seeing examples, so I found it helpful to actually see some examples of his Blake Snyder beat sheet. So I would definitely recommend the Blake Snyder books and Sid Field's Screenplay, and then Lance Eggery's Art of Dramatic Writing.
So what would you say to the person that really has a hard time letting other people read their screenplay? They, for whatever reason, they don't want to let their guard down, maybe?
I don't know. And I definitely, what I run into a lot on Selling Your Screenplay is, people think that if they show their ideas or their script to somebody else is going to steal it.
Yeah.
And, it's such a, like, no professional screenwriters even worry about that for a second. I mean, you want to do the normal things. You want to send it to the WJ. You want to potentially send it to the Library of Congress for a copyright. So you want to be, smart about it. You're not just, sending it out for people to steal, but beyond that, you don't want to worry about it. And you just have to send stuff out for feedback. I don't know. I mean, if you're the person who is very worried about just, your friends are going to laugh at you or criticize you, you've just got to get over that. And if you can't get over it, maybe screenwriting is not for you. I would say that's potentially something. I mean, screenwriting is not the be-all, end-all. There's lots of great things, in the world that you can go and do with your life. But if you can't get over that hurdle of getting feedback and taking feedback, I think you're just probably in the wrong business. Or, maybe if you're early on in your career, just start sending it out and just start consciously trying to get over those fears. You're going to have to send it out to people. And believe me, your friends and family are going to be nice to you when you start getting that sort of feedback. You're going to start sending it out to people you don't know, getting feedback from them, and I mean, they are just going to absolutely rip it to shreds. Sure. So it's just part of the process, and I'd say just get used to it.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I don't want to end on a negative note, so let's, for that person that's really out there just trying to give it a shot. You got 30 seconds to give them a piece of encouragement. What would you say to that person?
Yeah, I mean, and again, I talk about this on my podcast. I was not someone. I was a terrible student growing up. Nobody ever looked at me and ever thought I was a good writer or had any potential or aptitude towards writing. And it was just something I wanted to do, and so I went out and I did it. And I hope that comes across in my podcast is that, if you put your mind to something and you're persistent and you're pragmatic about it, I think you can succeed. And again, I was a terrible student. I didn't show any real aptitude for writing. So I think a lot of people can probably do this. A lot more people can do this than maybe think that they can do it. And don't get bogged down. And it's going to be a long journey. The longest journey starts with the first step. Stay focused on sort of the big prize and just plod along. But I'm not, a super smart guy. I'm not like a super great writer. I just plug away every day, do a little bit more and try and move the ball forward just a little bit. And, over the course of many, many years, that's started to pay off. And I think you can do it too. Anybody listening to this, if they stick to it and put their minds to it, it's going to be a lot of work. And I think sometimes people underestimate how much work it's going to take. But I think people can do it. A lot more people can do it than end up doing it. Let's put it like that.
I like that. I'm a sports junkie, and I love watching how guys from these small schools that you would have never thought anybody would play in the NFL or NBA, they come out of these little dinky schools, but they put in the work. They were willing to go in. They went to practice every day. They worked harder than the guy next to him, obviously, And a lot of these guys, it didn't have anything to do with skill. It just had to do with desire.
Yeah.
Same thing here.
Yeah. No, I mean, look at what Steph Curry's doing up in the Bay Area. I mean,
Yeah.
did anybody really think that he was going to be the best NBA player?
Yeah.
One time, certainly not. He went to a fairly small school. He's exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that any of us, we're all capable of that greatness. So, well, this has just been awesome, Ashley. I really appreciate you coming on. Love what you have going on at Selling Your Screenplay. I definitely encourage people to check out your podcast. And we'll have links in the show notes to your Kickstarter. I highly recommend. Go give them a hand there. I really feel like if we're, someday we're all going to need a little help with whatever project we got going on. And the least we can do is try to help others with theirs.
Yeah. So, well, Doc, I appreciate the support and thanks for reaching out. And it's been great just coming on and talking with you.